The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, the only podcast which is devoted to .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, SignalR, and not forgetting the .NET Core community itself. I am your host, Jamie Gabrogman-Taylor, and this is episode 19, the .NET Foundation with Jon Galloway. In this episode of the .NET Core podcast, I talk with Jon Galloway about the .NET Foundation. Jon is one of the hosts of the Herding Code podcast, one of the hosts of the ASP.NET Community Stand-Ups, and is the executive director of the .NET Foundation. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. First thing I want to say, Jon, if that's all right, is thank you so much for devoting some time and, coming onto the podcast. I know that you're an incredibly busy person.
Well, thank you for the invite, and I'm excited about what you're doing with your podcast, and happy to be here.
Thank you ever so much. I really do appreciate everyone who takes the time to be on the show, because I'm just some guy who really digs on .NET Core, and I want to sort of bounce it out to the world and say, hey, you guys, you should be using this software, you should be using this framework, because I'm so excited about it,
Yep, I agree with you.
For the incredibly small number of people who listen to this show but may not have heard of you or some of the work you do, I was wondering, could you maybe give us a brief introduction?
Sure. I have been developing with .NET since, it was early on. I played with betas. I was before that I was doing, VB6 and classic ASP. So I was really excited when ASP.NET and just .NET in general came out. So I've been using it since the beginning. Prior to joining Microsoft, I worked at a variety of companies, internet consultancies, financial companies. My two kind of recent jobs before joining Microsoft, I worked one job with Phil Hack, who went on to be the PM for ASP.NET MVC, and some friends, and we had small consulting shop, and that was fun doing .NET development and as much open source as we could. And then after that, I worked for Vertigo Software, and we did all kinds of like keynote demos and things for Microsoft. So I've been at Microsoft since I think end of 2009. And worked in a variety of roles, but they've always been related to .NET, open source, web development, and a lot of kind of community stuff. So presentations, building demos, supporting keynote demos, building training kits, things like that. And then for the past almost 2 years, I've been executive director of .NET Foundation, and at least half of my job at the .NET Foundation is explaining what the heck the .NET Foundation is. So,
oh, well, that's good. Then you'll have lots of practice for this episode of the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that kind of takes us up to today.
Since you've had so much practice, could you maybe give us a quick introduction to the .NET Foundation? What it is, how it works, all that kind of stuff?
Sure. Yeah, so the .NET Foundation is an independent, nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting open source .NET. So that first kind of key word there is it's independent. It's not part of Microsoft. So it's a in the U.S., it's registered as a 501c6, which is it's a nonprofit, and it's a separate company. So we do all of the separate. We file taxes. We have a board of directors. We're a separate business. However, I'm a Microsoft employee. So the way that works is Microsoft donates my time to the .NET Foundation. Same way as a company may, allow you to dedicate some of your working time towards an open source project or something like that. So .NET Foundation it's external to Microsoft. It has some kind of primary goals in supporting open source .NET. One of those is when you have an open source project that you care about, it can be really sad to have that project like just kind of being dependent on one or two developers hacking on their weekends, and then that developer moves away or gets abducted by aliens or just is not interested anymore, and then that's the end of the project. So we really want open source projects that we care about to be sustainable. And so we do a lot of work with .NET Foundation to set up projects with legal, with support systems, build processes, things like secret sharing and that kind of stuff, so that projects can be supported not just by one or two people, but by, or, a small little group of people, but that they can be long-term sustainable. So what that means is, let's say, you've got a project that, I'll give you an example, a project like recently JSON.NET joined. So as part of joining, we review who are the main contributors to the project, and it's almost all James Newton King. And this is the top open source, NuGet, downloaded and used by millions of people, but really supported and developed by one person. So what we want to do in terms of making sure that it's bigger, it continues to have the full support of James Newton King, but also is long-term sustainable and kind of has this stamp of support and all that, is we set up things like code signing, and instead of the logins and GitHub rights and all that, just set up with James's GitHub account. We actually have the project owner join a GitHub org and add this DNF admin account to that, and that admin account then can add on other contributors with James's permission. And then again, if James gets abducted by aliens or whatever, then we're able to bring on new contributors. We also do things like just kind of good practices for projects, make sure they have things like contribution guidelines and their licenses are all in place. We have legal services to review things as projects join and on an ongoing basis. So all those things that are really important. If you're a big company and you want to use a library and you say, can I trust this library to be around in 2 years, and that, they have a legit license and all that kind of stuff, it's really important, but it's also boring and time consuming for an open source project leader. They don't want to spend their time with all that stuff. So instead of that, we try and bundle that up and handle that for as many projects as we can. So that's a huge part of it. Then there's other things that the foundation does to support open source.NET. One of those is, like, for instance, we have a Meetup Pro group for meetups around the world, and we have 150,000 members, 245 groups have joined so far, and we pay the Meetup Pro fees for them. What we're trying to do is build this kind of center of gravity for open source.NET. It's got the full support of Microsoft, but it's not just Microsoft. It's the entire community. I mean, there's a lot more, but I've already kind of rambled on a bit. But that's kind of the goal, is to support open source.NET projects and then to catalyze and empower the community to kind of, guess that's a lot of business buzzwords, but to make it really come alive and make it easier for new people to get involved and contribute and all that stuff. Is that clear? Is that good? I don't know. I'm still working on the pitch.
That's great. That answers a lot of questions, actually. I did have a bunch of smaller questions that I'd written down just before this interview, and I was like, ask about whether it's open source or closed source, or whether it's big teams, small teams. It seems like it's pretty much anyone creating anything open source for .NET can contact the .NET Foundation and get these services, the legal, I think on the website it says SSL and, like you said, build engines and things like that.
Yeah. SSL is one thing, but a tougher one to crack has been code signing. If a team wants a code signing certificate, you actually need a business entity. So one of our members of our board of directors, currently, as we're talking in January, and that's going to change in the future, we're going to have elections coming up. But Oren Novotny has set up this code signing service, and we worked out this deal where we actually register trade name, or in the US it's known as a DBA, a doing business as registration. So if a project wants to set up code signing, we actually are able to kind of register in their name and issue a certificate to them. And so it's an actual code signing certificate that will say something like Identity Server or AutoMapper or JSON.NET or whatever. And then we also automate things. So as their CI builds run, those builds are code signed. And that's useful because that works with NuGet's kind of security systems or identity systems. And it's helpful for if a company wants to use a NuGet package or a library, that they can verify that it kind of meets all their requirements of, yes, this is the distribution of it. So, and again, those are super boring things as an open source project leader or developer. You don't want to spend your time messing with getting a trade name registered or getting a certificate, issued to you, or getting a build set up. And so that's something where we want to help out there and kind of handle that.
That's great. Is it a case of any open source .NET project, or is there like a threshold for you must have this many users, this many downloads on NuGet, this much community involvement on GitHub, or is it just, hey, I have created an open source .NET library and I want to get the .NET Foundation to help me out?
Well, I'll tell you what it has been, and I'll tell you where we're hoping to go in the future. So what it has been is it's case by case. Projects have applied to join, and we actually have a backlog. And I have some people that ping me and say, hey, we've requested to join, and when can we join? And there's only so many that we can bring on at a time, and also that we can support well. Up till now, it's been basically me as executive director doing the day-to-day work. I get approval from the board of directors for new projects to join. We have an advisory council that helps out some, but a lot of that is also waiting on me to kind of get them information or ask for help on things. And so up till now, we've had in the range of 60, 65 projects have joined. I would like to see two things happen in the future. One is for more projects to join. And we've got some plans for this year how to kind of expand the .NET Foundation to handle that. But then also, there are a lot of projects that are below a threshold of, we don't necessarily need hundreds or thousands of projects joining the .NET Foundation, but there are hundreds or thousands of useful open source .NET projects out there. So we'd also like to be able to do more kind of informally or more lightweight support for open source .NET projects, where we're able to just say, hey, you don't have to join the whole .NET Foundation and go through this whole kind of legal process and this review process and all that. We'd like to just be able to say, hey, click through on this form if you're an open source project, and maybe we'll be able to set you up with these things. So having kind of a lightweight model would be great too. We don't have anything officially in the works for that. That's just kind of some along the lines of some of the things we brainstormed with the advisory council. It's like, hey, how can we help out the broader open source .NET ecosystem, with a kind of more lightweight model too. So those are, the two kind of answers there. One is bring on more projects officially, and then two is be able to kind of be more flexible in terms of helping projects that don't join the .NET Foundation but are still part of the open source .NET community.
It sounds like, like you say, that's an informal plan. It's not set in stone. You're still sort of figuring it all out. But that sounds like it's a brilliant way to sort of think about it. I'm envisioning, now obviously I'm inferring. Is that the right way around? I always get implying and inferring the wrong way around.
So imply is what I say to you, and infer is how you hear it. That's how I try to remember.
Okay, yep, that's cool. I'll try to remember that way too. The way that I'm inferring it, the way that I'm envisioning a system is like, I have an open source .NET thing. It could be .NET Framework, .NET Core, Mono, Xamarin, whatever. I submit to the .NET Foundation, and, you or the council might say, actually, that's not quite what we can support at the moment, but let me put you in touch with a bunch of open source .NET contributors who may be able to help.
Yeah.
And that might not be on a person-to-person basis, but that might be here is a forum full of people who want to help, but don't know what they can help with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing where, like, connecting people, getting contributors in touch with projects that need help, that's a great thing. That doesn't take a huge formal joining of a foundation to do. It's just more kind of like thinking strategically about it. And, we've taken some baby steps with this, and I'd love to see it get bigger. But for instance, in August and September of 2017, we ran a thing called .NET Summer Hackfest. And it was end of the summer, and we took a 6-week period, and we had probably about 5 to 10 projects. It's been a little bit, so I don't have the exact number, but I would say like 7 or 8 projects. And they hosted a 2-week hack event, and it was virtual. It was online, and we had some guidance for them. We said, hey, have a bunch of up for grabs issues, have a page that says, here's how to contribute, here's how to get started, maybe have an event. Some of them had like a video call and said, hey, if you want to get involved, here's what to do. We had a budget for it. We had some of the projects had like large, one of them turned it into like a mini conference. And so we just got developers hacking on projects and contributing to projects. And then the projects set some goals of here's what we hope to get done during this time. Here's the little steps, here's some issues from small to large. And so that was really cool. And over a course of 6 weeks, there's Humanitarian Toolbox. There were several projects that upgraded to .NET Standard 2. That was an example of a thing where we just connected people and we didn't, it was more of a lightweight sort of thing. And we also just from time to time have done things where we'll see, a project on Twitter says, help, we need, our certificate expired and, we're taking up a collection. Well, that's something where we have budget where I can use the company card and donate $150 or something. That's not a big deal. But again, that's something where I'd love to expand that, and have a larger fund and have some people that, not just me, have some people looking out and saying like, here's where we can, we've got a budget of $5,000 or $10,000 a year and let's strategically jump in and help out a project. And that can be all sorts of, it may be something where a project needs translation services or a vendor to help review some tests or documentation or something, write some tutorials. The sky's kind of the limit, when you start thinking about it. And again, there are larger projects that need really dedicated services. And then there are other projects that just could use some help from time to time.
I don't think that there are very many other sort of application frameworks. I guess .NET isn't, it is a framework, but it's more of a framework and runtime and hundreds and thousands of APIs and libraries and stuff. But I can't think of another foundation off the top of my head that does this for a very, very popular framework and, API set that can offer something like that. I know obviously we all have access to Twitter and we can just shout out, hey, can someone help me with, I'm looking for someone to help with this, or can someone code review this? But I guess having this large foundation and, and a lot of public people sat in the foundation saying, yeah, okay, I will bounce this out because I've seen you do it. I've seen you go, hey, can anyone help this person and retweet something? that's a huge thing for a lot of the smaller open source developers, just getting the voice out, I guess.
Well, yeah, it is great to have taken a more organized look at that, probably the thing that makes me the most excited when I think back of, recently in my career or just, my entire career is being able to help other projects out. Like the code I've written has been fun and some of it's still used frighteningly enough. But, the best thing has been when developers come up and talk to me and say, hey, I used your course to do this, and now I have a job in software development. And that same sort of thing, being able to highlight projects. Over time, I've been able to do that on the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up and on the ASP.NET website over the years. And it's so great when projects say, hey, thanks for that boost, and we got new contributors out of it, or we got, big bump in downloads. So being able to have that not just be a random I happened to see this thing on Twitter, so I retweeted it, have it be a bigger organized thing is great. Also, you mentioned the thing about that there's not much else out there like this. And I had not cared about or thought about software foundations at all. But as being part of this, I've gotten more aware of, there are several other software foundations out there. And in a lot of ways, we're still learning from them. For instance, there's the Apache Software Foundation, there's Linux Foundation, there's Node Foundation, there's, tons of foundations. And these foundations all have these similar sorts of goals of they're nonprofits and they're supporting open source. And the whole idea is, hey, if you care about open source, you want it to be sustainable. And open source is the way open source is set up, it's volunteer time, it's community contributions, it's people donating, and so it's hard to kind of think long term about it and to make sure that it stays around. It's hard for companies to say, yeah, okay, I've got these paid companies that I can buy their product from and they'll offer me a support contract, or I can use this open source project that looks great, but I don't know if this project's going to be around in 2 years. And so software foundations really kind of have this dedicated goal of supporting open source projects. And so, in some ways we've done some things that is new and breaking new ground. .NET has an interesting heritage because it's been almost completely run by Microsoft. But from the beginning, there were some kind of open source roots to it. Like it was developed as an ECMA standard. There have been a lot of things that Microsoft over time has released as open source. But it's been this weird kind of, it's open source, but it's mostly a Microsoft product and you need to run it on Windows and you need IIS. Microsoft runs all this stuff. And so whereas other open source projects have been open source from the beginning, you think about like Linux or Java or a lot of others. And so in some ways we're catching up a bit to some of these other ecosystems, and we're learning what's worked well for them. And I think that's great. I think it only makes sense to learn from what's worked well for people and to contextualize it in places where the same model works great for us. That's great. And if there are others where we say, hey, we can do something that works better for .NET, that's what we'll do,
Just switching it up slightly then. I think you've mostly covered this anyway, but I'd still like to ask. So you are the executive director for the .NET Foundation. Could you give us an idea of what that means? Is this a community outreach thing? Is this a developer advocacy thing? Is this you are, and I hate to sort of belittle it slightly, but a go-between between the community and the directors? How does that all work?
Yeah, so an executive director works for the board of directors. So it's funny, it's a job title that both sounds really big and impressive, and on the other hand, it's like I work for people, so I'm not in charge of anybody, right? So it's a lot of things. It's basically the person that oversees the day-to-day operations of the foundation. So this week, some of the things were paying off bills and setting up financial things and making sure beginning of the year financial stuff was done. There's other things that's as simple as running the website and updating content. There is stuff like supporting projects. So, project says, hey, CLAs aren't working on our website, contributor license agreement. Can you help set that up? Just before this podcast, we had our monthly advisory council call. And so I was briefing the advisory council on here's what we're doing and getting advice from them. And our advisory council is amazing. And they are great at saying, like, all that stuff sounds good, except for this thing. I think you're going about it wrong. And have you considered this? So those are the sorts of things. It really is all over the place. There's so many things. I have huge OneNotes that have spelled out all the processes of here's how to set a new project up in the CLA bot. Here's how to add a new project. Here's a checklist for adding new projects and the approval processes. Here's the legal steps for registering a new DBA. There's just tons and tons of admin sort of things. So there is that. There is also the kind of public face of .NET Foundation. So things like talking to you on podcasts and helping get the word out and hopefully explaining software foundations in a way that doesn't bore people and makes it real to them. I speak at conferences. It's really hard to kind of narrow down what it is. I would just say it's the person that every day cares about what the .NET Foundation's doing and kind of manages the business stuff to get it done.
Wow, that is an awful lot. I mean, I turn up for work, I look at the backlog of work, I write some code, I test my code, I write some extra documentation, and I go home. I can't even imagine how you managed to get all of that done. And I seem to remember seeing you say about how you're traveling all over the planet to go to conferences and things. And I hope you don't mind me saying this, but it was only a few days ago when you tweeted out something about how you wake up in the morning, you work out, you do a whole day's work, you fly to Europe, you work out local time midnight, then go to bed.
Well, that's not every day.
How do you manage to get all of this done during the day?
That's a bit of a side thing, but this past year, I had made a silly New Year's resolution that I sometimes regretted, but I told myself I was going to exercise every day for a year. We're all getting older and sitting working at a desk, it's harder to kind of keep active. And so I somehow did it, and I hadn't thought ahead about how difficult that was going to be on days where I had a flight from California to Europe. And so there were days where I was getting up at 5 o'clock, exercise, hurry to the airport, fly. With the time change, it would be night before I would get to my hotel. And then before midnight, I would sneak in that day's exercise. But I actually found that it gave me a lot more energy. Exercising consistently actually made me have more energy day to day. It's funny. Every day I feel like I've got a backlog, and my goal is always to make the backlog a little bit shorter than it was at the beginning of the day. And many days that's really hard to do. So a lot of it is kind of looking at a big list and saying, like, which of these things do I absolutely have to get done today? But then also looking at the long-term things and saying, this has been sitting out there for a month. I need to get it done.
Wow, okay. So what you're saying is for a long, happy developer life, lots of exercise. Because, I mean, it's good for you, right?
Yeah, I really think so. It's something where it kind of shifts around. I've seen some really interesting things with this where they talk about how it actually changes your brain chemistry, and it changes your body. So, and I haven't been completely rigid with this, but I've been trying to do Duolingo and learn some Mandarin Chinese, and same sort of thing. I'll never be good at Mandarin Chinese, but it's exercise. And I think also it's really easy for developers to just be online developing, programming, and be in the developer community all day, every day. And your brain sometimes just needs a rest from some of that.
I can understand that completely. I bit of an amateur Japanese speaker. I studied it for a while at university, and when I need to switch off, it'll sound really big-headed. But when I need to switch off, I'll just put on a movie that's in Japanese with the English subtitles in case I can't be bothered to try and parse what people are saying. It's just that big switch of I've been writing lots of code and doing lots of problem solving to I'm going to turn that part of my brain off and let this language parsing bit take over and just let the logical side of, or the logical parts of my brain just relax and chill out.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Well, I mean, it can be. You can't be running on full steam all the time, can you?
I think that also makes your time that you are writing code or doing your work, makes that time more productive too, because you're more flexible in your thinking and you're not so mechanical about it.
Sure, yeah. And I feel like it gives your subconscious a chance to sort of go, I'll figure this out for you whilst you're doing something else. Yeah, hey, you're doing the dishes. You're making some dinner. I'm going to figure this out for you in the background, and I'll present you with the answer, because the subconscious part of the brain is so powerful. It's much more powerful, from what I've been told, much more powerful than the conscious part of the brain. So it's able to figure things out a lot quicker than the conscious part, And like I say, you've got to rest, something's got to give.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now that we've had that little diversion from the .NET Foundation, maybe we could bring it back to the Foundation just for a couple more things, if that's all right.
Yeah, and one of the things that's probably most important we should talk about is some of the recent announcements we've been making.
Sure, definitely, yeah.
I'll start with the simple one, and then I'll go for the bigger one next. So the simple one is we have expanded our technical steering group to a corporate sponsor program. And what that means is previously we had a technical steering group, and that was companies like Google, Red Hat, JetBrains, Samsung, Unity. And those companies, for the most part, were like doing things that were pretty deep technically into .NET. They were doing things like shipping .NET or supporting frameworks on top of .NET. And we had companies talk to us and say, hey, we'd like to join .NET Foundation. But a lot of the time they were companies that cared about .NET, that their business depended on .NET, or they had large line of business applications on .NET, that sort of thing. But it was kind of a different model. So what we've done is we've expanded the technical steering group to a corporate sponsor program. We announced at the Connect event that we had 3 new companies joining us, and those are Pivotal, Telerik, and Insight. And what's neat with that is Pivotal is more of a platform company, and Progress Telerik is developer tools, and Insight is a consultancy systems integrator. All of these are companies that heavily use .NET. Their businesses rely on .NET. This kind of shows the breadth of what we're looking for. And other companies, I encourage other companies, people that are listening, if this sounds interesting to you, reach out to me. And I'd like to see more companies join. And so these companies are sponsoring .NET Foundation. They're contributing towards supporting open source projects. So that's really cool. The other big thing we announced, though, is open membership. And one of our secret weapons in the .NET Foundation is that a member of our board of directors is Miguel de Icaza. And Miguel helped early on in the GNOME Foundation on their board of directors, and he kind of helped us figure out and evolve our membership model. And also the previous executive director, Martin Woodward, had done a lot of work on this. So what we settled with is a newer open membership model that makes it easier for people listening, if you've contributed to .NET, to join the .NET Foundation as a voting member. And then voting members are also eligible to run for election in the .NET Foundation board. So up until now, .NET Foundation has had 3 members in the board of directors, and 2 have been Microsoft employees. And one has been a community director but they've been appointed by Microsoft as well. And what we're moving towards is we're expanding that from 3 members in the board of directors to 7. And only one of those is appointed by Microsoft. So that is 6 other members of the board of directors that are community elected. Let's step back and see what that means. Let's say you have contributed to a .NET Foundation project. That doesn't just mean, Core CLR or Core FX. It could be .NET Docs. It could also be .NET Foundation project, Automapper, Identity Server, Poly project, tons of different open source .NET Foundation projects. So say you've contributed to one of those projects. You can apply to join the .NET Foundation, and now you're eligible to either vote in the elections or run for a board seat. So we're going to have the elections process kick off late January, and the elections are, somebody will say, hey, I'm going to run for board of directors. This is why I want to be on the board of directors. I'm pushing for whatever it is you're passionate about. Maybe you feel like .NET Foundation should be more present and active in the startup space, or should be engaging with students more, or you would like to see .NET Foundation doing more to make open source projects more economically viable, making sure that companies are able to pay to support projects or things like that, right? So people will campaign. It's a 1-month election process, and then anyone that's a member can vote in that election. This is now the time where the .NET Foundation very clearly is much more than Microsoft, and it's got the full support of Microsoft. We've got one board seat that is appointed by Microsoft, and Microsoft deeply cares about and uses .NET. So this isn't the open source where it's going away kind of open source, right? This is the open source where we love .NET so much that we want more people to be able to join in and get involved. So we would love to see community leaders, and it was amazing at the Connect event when we announced this. Immediately, we had tons of people, the top names in .NET open source were signing up. So if you go to the .NET Foundation site, .NETfoundation.org, right at the top, there's a banner that gives you information about joining the .NET Foundation. It's a quick little thing. You fill in your contact info, give your GitHub account name, give us some links to some commits or contributions you've made. We review that, and then we're planning to, hey, if these are legit contributions, you're welcome aboard. We base this partly off of GNOME Foundation, F# Foundation. Both of those are projects where people join. We do ask for a membership fee or dues. So we're asking for $100 per year. This is based on F# Foundation has had that. However, we understand that for students, that varies economically and around the world, different countries, $100 US may be asking too much, and that's fine. So basically, you're able to change that amount. So we're asking for $100 by default, but you're able to lower that or exempt yourself if you need to as a student or whatever. Because we want anyone that really cares about .NET and is a contributor to .NET to get involved. Looking at other foundations out there, like F# Foundation, there's thousands of members. GNOME Foundation, several hundred. And we'd love to see a lot of developers join. We'd like to see thousands of members of .NET Foundation. The elections process for the board is every year. And we'd love to see the leaders, the people that are writing the blog posts, that are starting the discussions on Twitter saying, here's how open source should be better in .NET. Great, get involved and run the show, do it. And we've got a budget now for you with corporate sponsors. It's up to you. It's up to you to get involved and to run things. And I'm excited to see where it goes. I have some ideas of things I'd love to see happen. And one of the biggest things is I'd love to see new ideas come in that are better than I've got. That's the kind of pitch on what we've announced. The corporate sponsorship to provide a budget, and then a board of directors that is community elected and can spend the budget and can get involved and get stuff done. So
almost anyone who has made a sizable contribution to one of the open source.NET Foundation projects, so the Core CLR, the docs, anything like Poly, like you said, or I guess Orchard, that's one of the .NET
Orchard's
Foundation
one of them,
isn't it?
Yeah, and you can go out onto the .NET Foundation site. There's a projects thing where you can click through there. As part of this, we've had people say, hey, I'd like to be a contributor. What can I contribute to? And so part of this is going to require us to make that easier for projects. Some projects, honestly, are kind of hard to contribute to. You can't just wander into the core CLR and start making contributions and pull requests. However, docs are a lot easier too. And then there's a lot of other projects out there that can use more help. Smaller projects, you've got something like AutoMapper, JSON.NET, Identity Server, all these projects. And so some of them have up for grabs issues. That's something where we're going to be publicizing, hey, if that's what's holding you back, if you'd like to become a contributor, here's some projects where you can jump in and do that. And they don't have to be huge contributions. If you correct spelling on 2 words in the docs, that's not really a valid contribution, but it doesn't have to be huge. We're not looking for enormous contributions. We're just looking for you're a contributor to .NET.
Sure. Okay. So it's more like a passion that's coming through for .NET and open source and helping out rather than just you've written a suite of tests, but we can't really tell that maybe there's some docs that aren't really well written, or maybe they haven't been translated to another language. Someone jumps in and starts that translation project, gets maybe 3/4 of the way through and goes, that's about as much as I can do at the moment, but maybe I'll come back to it.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So you've mentioned the elections. They're coming up soon, are they?
Yeah. So the target date we have for that is starting January 21st and running for a month. The election process is pretty lightweight. It's basically a pull request to tell us what your credentials are and why you're running for the board and what you'd like to accomplish. I'm interested to see where it goes. People may campaign on social media or get on podcasts or whatever. That's all fine. But, we'd love to see people that are passionate about .NET campaign. And then any member can vote. It'll be an online election process. We've based this on what GNOME Foundation does using a system called OPA Vote, and it's a single transferable vote. It's a ranked choice vote where you can vote for multiple people. So, and again, there's 6 open seats. The Microsoft appointed seat is going to be Beth Massey. We're excited about that. She's been part of .NET for forever, and she's been working with .NET Foundation. She's currently .NET Foundation secretary. She was part of the original kind of founding of the .NET Foundation. So she's perfect person to have as a Microsoft board seat. But we've got 6 open seats, and I'd love to see people that are passionate about .NET and ready to get involved and push it where you want to go. I'd love to see those people actively campaigning and then in those board seats.
Also, if anybody wants to be on the podcast to talk about why they should be elected, just get in touch.
I'd love to hear it. Honestly, that's, like I said, the biggest thing. I have ideas and dreams and goals for what I'd love to see .NET Foundation do, but I'm certain that there are plenty of people out there with better ideas and bigger ideas, and I'd love to see them.
Great. So if people want to get in contact with you or the .NET Foundation or anything like that, where's the best place for listeners to go to learn more about maybe yourself or to get in contact with the .NET Foundation? So
you can get in contact with me directly on Twitter. I'm Jon Galloway. My email address is jon@.netfoundation.org. You can also just email contact@.netfoundation.org. That hits me, and it also hits a few other people, Beth Massey and some other folks. So that's kind of the official generic email address, contact@.netfoundation.org. We have a Twitter handle also for .NET Foundation that's @.netfdn. I'd recommend follow .NET Foundation website. We have a blog. We also have a newsletter. You can sign up on the .NET Foundation newsletter, and that's linked on the website. There's a thing, get the news, and from the news, we have links to signing up for the newsletter. So that newsletter goes out usually about once a month, and then we also have other just kind of as something comes up. Those are some of the main ways. If in doubt, just ping me @Jon Galloway or contact@.netfoundation.org, and happy to hear from you.
All that remains to say is thank you again, Jon, for being on the podcast. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. I was a little nervous going in, if I'm honest, but an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, this has been great. I've been happy to talk to you, and I thank you for what you've been doing for the .NET community. I was excited to see your podcast come up, and I really enjoy the depth that you've put into your show, starting from the first episode. If you haven't heard it, the first episode I thought was really good, which a lot of podcasts don't. I can tell you, Herding Code did not start out very, it was kind of all over the place. So I really appreciate what you're doing as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for saying so. So definitely get in contact with Jon. Seriously, one of the best guests I've had so far. Loads of fun. Thank you ever so much, Jon.
Thank you, Jamie.
That was my interview with Jon Galloway of both .NET Foundation and of Microsoft. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .NETCore.show. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice, and to come back next time for more .NET Core goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks.